Okay, so I'm trying to imagine myself in your position. I would be. What made you want to stick to specific, like, if Mesos was kind of the popular thing at that time, I'm imagining myself in your situation, I would have been compelled to even try to hedge bets and like try to build for both potentially, or seeing how you can kind of, be in multiple ecosystems at a time. And I think there are a lot of other open source founders that also kind of have to hitch their wagon to one ecosystem or another. How are you thinking about kind of going all in on one versus diversifying?
If you'd have been my advisor at the time, I might have ended up being. Maybe I should have.
Well, you would have been wrong, though, right? If you were listening to this.
But genuinely, I did actually look at Mesos, and there were a couple of customers at MongoDB who'd experimented with it, and they really, really liked it. But then when I started scratching the surface, I heard from some of the users, and they were saying it's incredibly powerful, but it's taken us a year or 2 years to get to a point where we've actually started to get our head around how to use it and manage it. And it's so complicated. And it was just listening to user stories and just hearing that it was almost so difficult to set up that I was like, I'm not sure I can really be bothered. And you might say Kubernetes is complicated to set up, which it is, but it was actually probably easier though than Mesos or Mesosphere at the time.
Orchestration is just a complicated problem in general. Like, there's not going to be a simple, kind of one size fits all.
I'm probably wrong with this as well, but I think I saw Mesos. I saw Mesos being very closely connected to Mesosphere as a company, so a little bit more tied to the company, whereas Google just given or put Kubernetes into the CNCF as part of the Linux Foundation. So it felt to me like there was more likely to be a bigger ecosystem that grew around Kubernetes than there would around Mesosphere. So as much as I thought Mesosphere might be successful, I felt like there was going to be more space for me as a founder in an open source project to be in one that was a bit more a bit more protected from commercial interests, and that's why Kubernetes was also a good choice.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I think that when you look at building an open source company and you're building it around another open source ecosystem, right? So you're building open source software on top of open source software on top of open source software.
As we all are.
Picking vendors that are, or projects that are single vendor controlled is difficult, because it does kind of like sway a lot of the development efforts and a lot of the features. And I think it does, potentially, provide some risk, because.
But Mesos was in the Apache Foundation too at the time, so it's not.
So, but even so, with being in the Apache Foundation, that's great and, whatnot. But what you start to see is, even with the Apache projects that are out there today, if you look at the core contributors, the majority of core contributors for Cassandra are in, a single company, or, Kafka, or, so you end up having a lot of politics behind the scenes, but it still has a very slanted way. And if those developers are focused on enterprise features for their own open core version, So
I mean, you could make the argument that Google is that commercial entity behind it, but I think the difference with Google was that they donated it, and B, it didn't feel to me like they were trying to use Kubernetes to make money from it directly. What they cared about was their cloud service.
And that is a fundamental difference.
And so the compute, like, rather than selling Kubernetes.
Right.
So again, I mean, and again, there are people that I was speaking to at the time, and the people I've seen here, who were very conscious of Google's influence in Kubernetes, and they were worried. And I was like, yeah, I can kind of see that, but I also feel like this is a fundamental thing they've given to the community because they're trying to compete against Amazon, and they're willing to give it up. And I think, and so it was a competitive thing against Amazon, but they knew what they were doing in that, and so therefore I felt like it was enough dissociated from Google that it was gonna create its own ecosystem, which it did, because pretty soon afterwards, you had Amazon like creating an Amazon service around it, Microsoft doing the same thing, because Brendan actually being a founder who ended up being brought in by Microsoft gave me a bit of confidence, because I was like, Microsoft would not be investing in hiring one of the Kubernetes founders and trying to create a Kubernetes service unless they also had the confidence that it was going to be a standalone project that could create its own ecosystem around it. So yeah, but it wasn't by any means an easy question to answer, put it that way.